Good morning and welcome to Living in the Promised Land. I'm the host, Mark Shmueli, and with us today is Professor Wilmer Leon of Morgan State right now and has been at Howard and many other institutions and has his own show, Connecting the Dots, which he'll plug. And Wilmer, welcome.
Mark, a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So Wilmer, I've been on Wilmer's show quite a few times talking about different immigration issues over the years and really talking about the larger aspect of those issues in U.S. foreign policy, in, um, in policies regarding race, regarding poverty, and in immigration, I think we both agree is kind of the gateway. So on a recent appearance on the Mark Lamont Hill show, Wilmer, you talked about these recent arrests of Mahmoud Khalil, Rumisa Ozturk, and others, student activists from universities, as a gateway to the end of due process, to an attack on due process. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, really what brought this to my attention was with the deportation of the first 200 and some odd Venezuelans that they sent to El Salvador. And I remember when um, Secretary of State Rubio was in touring the prison in El Salvador, and President Bukele said to him, he says, you can send your prisoners to us. And instead of Rubio looking at him and saying, thank you, but oh no, that's insane, or no, we can't do that, that's unconstitutional, he said, no one has ever offered that to us before. We'll have to take that under advisement. And so that got me thinking what this was really all about. And that led me to, this is really just a trial balloon. Sending these quote unquote terrorists, who nobody has been able to determine whether they're actually terrorists or not, to a foreign country without due process. President Trump and his minions are really just trying to test the limits that the court will allow to press the due process. And that if he's able to get away with deporting them, who's next? And it just made me realize we're next. That as we start looking at more discontent in the country, as the economic pie right now, because of Trump's tariffs and all of these other people paying $6, $7, $8, $9 a dozen for eggs and $3.50 a pound for tomatoes, that all of these pressures could very well result in violence. And what's he going to do? How is he going to respond when Americans decide they've had enough? And so I think they're looking to the future. He's now, and I came to this weeks ago, and now he's talking about, oh, well, we have to do something with our homegrown terrorists. And when you listen to his language, for example, I think one of the first places he sent some of these immigrants was to Guantanamo Bay. Why? Well, because when you ask somebody on the street, what do you think about Gitmo? Or what do you think about Guantanamo Bay? They'll say, oh, that's where the terrorists go. So he's using his language, creating this narrative, this kind of call and response. If you go to Gitmo, you must be a terrorist. If you're a terrorist, you're less than human. If you're less than human, we can do with you whatever we like. And now we're hearing him say himself, oh, we got to look at these laws. We got to see how we can get these people out of here. Who are these people? Well, I know people of color have always been the target. So that's the long answer to your short question.
Well, no, and thank you. Well, it makes me think that we're getting there pretty rapidly, as somebody who's worked on immigrant rights, as somebody who dedicates this podcast to that, and as somebody who has seen, just as an immigration lawyer, the the public response. I mean, many of my clients have are married to U.S. citizens, and many of those folks are not what they say. They didn't marry their spouse because they are involved in the immigrant world. They just happen to marry them. So when something is going wrong, they tend. I've had many people who supported immigration restriction as clients over the years, and all that. But what I'm seeing now is, you know, Southeast Iowa town halls in the middle of the day that Chuck Grassley calls. He says he does them all the time. But as one person, said the other day, how does a working person get to this town hall? I mean, they trend to be older anyway, but that's assuring that you get very few working people, or at least those that work in the daytime, and they are yelling at him about uh, the guy from El Salvador. What are you going to do about this guy from El Salvador? So I think we're seeing a sea change of what's acceptable. What do you think of that?
Oh, there's no question. In fact, I was talking to somebody last night in watching that. Well, the first thing I think that people need to pay attention to is Republicans having these town halls, and now the town halls are flooded with Trump people, conservative Repub. Not all, I know not all conservative people are Trump people, so I got that. They're flooded with MAGA people. They're flooded with conservatives, and they're yelling at their elected representatives. They are, and when they're what they're saying is, we didn't vote for this. We didn't vote for this. Which to me, the response is, well, first of all, yes, you did, because you were told what was going to happen. And you were told very clearly what was going to happen. When somebody tells you we're going to deconstruct the administrative state, what do you think that means? What? What? So, Steve Bannon, Steve Bannon, the Trump whisperer, was very clear. We're going to deconstruct the administrative state. Well, what is that? So you get that point. So with that, then, so what that really means is they're not saying they don't really mean I didn't vote for this. What they're saying is you weren't supposed to do this to me. You weren't supposed to do this to my family. You're looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. My daughter just lost her government job. She wasn't wasteful. My wife just lost. She was on the last day of her probationary period at I don't know, the Veterans Administration. She wasn't fraudulent. Now she's sitting at home. You fired her for no reason. I'm a veteran and I can't get my access to my care because you closed the Veterans Hospital in my community. But that wasn't abuse. I'm a veteran. You weren't supposed to do this to me. So that to me, that's what they're really saying. Um, so you go from there, you go to Mike Johnson, the speaker, saying to his people, well, just don't hold these town halls. Don't hold these town halls because the optics are bad. We can't have America seeing these optics. So now you have Chuck Grassley in, where is he? Iowa?
Yes.
You've got a 91-year-old white senator in Iowa, and another white person in Iowa is screaming at him, what about that guy from El Salvador that lives in Maryland that you just sent to El Salvador? And to me, I have to put it in the ethnic dynamic, because that to me speaks volumes. When did white people in Iowa start caring about Latinos, Hispanics, people from Central America? Because they've always been told that those are the enemy. Those are the ones that are coming across the border and bringing drugs and taking your job and raping your children and all this other kind of foolishness that Donald Trump wanted to spew. So that to me, that one comment to me speaks volumes about they are losing the narrative. They're losing the argument, whether it's having to do with um, Zionism and anti-Semitism and the genocide in Gaza. They're losing the argument. And when they start to lose the argument, they got to turn the screws on free speech, and they've got to get the people out of here that are making all the noise.
Well, and it's interesting because as a thought that came to me from that is in times past, you had people from other countries who were either right wing or anti-communist from the countries, and there were people who faced legitimate suppression in places like Soviet Russia. They came to the United States and spoke and were part of the government. There were some that were not democratic, but there were people that were actually democratic that came from other places. So there were different faces on that, even in the face of the Cold War. Right now, as diverse as we are, this really is a white supremacist play. I mean, this administration, there are some Southeast Asians, but there are no African Americans in the cabinet, I believe, right?
Uh, uh, I think the Secretary of HUD. I think.
Okay, maybe.
I,
Um,
I think because HUD is where the Republicans usually put the black person.
yes,
I
yes.
couldn't tell you who it is, but I think there's a spot. There's some pepper in the salt.
But certainly not making there's no Colin Powells, there's no,
No,
in this administration, there's no Condis, there's
no.
none of that. And so these are all absolute white supremacists. So when they play the media game, they're playing it in a way that is extremely base, as we see with any of these people that are arrested, captured, kidnapped, and put in detention. These immigrants that are there, and it is a some of them caught, arrested right before their citizenship interviews, like the gentleman in Vermont the other day, who is a 10-year um, uh, green card holder and a peace activist, a man who actually brought Palestinians and Israelis on the campus. I mean, he wasn't even part of the movement in 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 that he actually broke a little bit by saying we need everybody's voice to be heard, but they don't want that. They don't want a voice to be heard. They want one voice to be heard, as I see it.
They want capitulation. Scott Turner is the Secretary of HUD, and as far as I know, he's the only African American in the cabinet. And you don't hear anything from HUD, I would think, for a reason. Um, you're right. This is they don't again. Free speech is under attack. Um, uh, Due process is under attack. The things the civil liberties that a democracy needs in order to effectively function as a democracy are slowly being wiped away. In fact, I'm working on a piece. I need to stop saying I'm working on it. I need to get it finished. Um, it I'm working on a piece because this is analogous to uh, what in The Sun Also Rises, in Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. Mike is asked, how did you go bankrupt? And his answer is, oh, I went bankrupt gradually, then suddenly. And I see the erosion of democracy now as happening the very same way. Because a lot of things that we're seeing Trump do, Joe Biden did, or Joe Biden tried to do, but he was much more subtle in his approach. Now, instead of using a scalpel, now the meat cleaver comes out. And so we are watching before our very eyes our democracy dissolve. I'm sorry. Um, and again, so it's like Mike said in The Sun Also Rises. I went bankrupt gradually, then suddenly.
Well, and that's exactly the point that I wanted to pivot to right now. So thank you in that.
I'm
Um,
channeling my inner Mark Shmueli. That's what I'm doing.
there you go. So the so we see this. We see what is authoritarianism. There's so much out there. I mean, it's crazy to turn on the nightly news, that my, now 91-year-old mom was watching her, when she was more there in the mid 80s, the nightly news when we would sit and watch and they'd have the three stories. And now to see these comforting people basically there to comfort elderly folks who still watch the nightly news with stories that say, President Trump has deported this green card holder student and his professors or yanked off the street. This is shocking. And you can't, and they're showing this video and they're showing CNN is going down to the CCOT, the prison in El Salvador. And it's the jokes between the press conference in the White House the other day was such a horror show. It's really it's almost post comedy. I mean, you see comedians struggling with this when and it's and but the point you're making, which I think is true, is that these horrors were happening before. I mean, Jon Stewart made a living laughing at George Bush, but he killed a million Iraqis and children,
Yeah,
and the horrors of Gaza, of just right now a complete starvation, a complete denial of aid. The
yeah.
Biden administration would have said, we're trying to get some aid and we're going to build a bridge, we're going to do something, because from the at least the PR point, or at least that level of their humanity, they felt, okay, it's not good to have that level of starvation. We need to sort of have this maintenance. But it reminds me of LBJ during Vietnam. I've been rewatching the series on PBS, or actually watching for the first time, and I'm hearing these lines of, well, we can't let it go, but we can't stop supporting it. And so this sort of middle line of keeping it going. And then you have people that say, we'll just bomb them into the Stone Age,
Mm-hmm.
and they're the ones that come in. So it for a voter, for a rational human being, it makes sense. Josh Shapiro says, when asked about, busting up the student protests, the anti-genocide protests on campuses, which are very well-rounded, of Jews, Palestinians, people
Mm-hmm.
from all over the world, people from all over the student body. And he said, well, if there were Nazis out there, you would take them out. So why, of course. And so you have those musings, which then have to be apologized for afterward, to, hey, they're Nazis, let's get rid of them, and they're a danger to us. So the door was open. The door was open. And I think that, so the question is, what's the alternative message? And do we get it from the Democrats?
No. Unfortunately, no, because the Democrats, in many regards, are being paid by the same lobbying group, such as APAC, that the Republicans are being. I mean, uh, Hakeem Jeffries, I want to say, got $750,000 from APAC I don't know over the time frame whether it was last year or, but I know that APAC had invested heavily into Hakeem Jeffries. In fact, there was an article in that APAC wrote in the New York Times. I want to say it was April of 2024. They said we're investing $100 million into, this was the headline, $100 million into the Democratic primary to unseat incumbent Democrats that we believe are anti-Israeli or anti-Israel. And nobody said a word. The Democrats didn't say a word. They didn't say a mumbling word. I was at the DNC, the convention in Chicago, when the Palestinians who had been credentialed were protesting right outside the front door of the arena. And Kamala Harris, the DNC, the National Committee, would not allow those people in, would not allow a voice on the stage. They brought in family members from October 7th, Jewish family members from October, Israeli family members from October 7th, but they did not allow not one Palestinian voice to be heard. How do you sell me genocide? That's what I need. Look, um, Cory Booker did his dribble-thon, 25-hour chatathon, not one, and he does this chatathon for 25 hours, and he ends it by saying, "This is a moral moment. This is a moral moment for America. We have to understand." You didn't say a mumbling word about genocide, dude.
He never mentioned Mahmoud Khalil. He didn't. In
Never.
25 hours, that name was, I think, David Muir and Anderson Cooper mentioned that name more than he did.
You can't be selective in your morality.
Right.
To me, that's immoral. Which is one I've heard a number of there's a I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he's an economist at Yale. He's written a number of books. He's leaving Yale, going to a university in Toronto, I believe.
Mhm.
And I heard him on NPR, and the point that he made was using anti-Semitism as a way to attack the First Amendment is anti-Semitic. He said, because all you're doing is using Jews to further an illegal move. He said that's anti-Semitic. And when you look at the when Mahmoud Khalil was arrested, you had what, about 125 people go have a sit in Trump Tower, and they were from Not in Our Name, Never Again. There were a number
Jewish
of
Voices for Peace.
Jewish voices for peace, and then didn't about 50 students chain themselves to the fence at Columbia University?
Yes,
And I think they were
all
Jewish.
Jewish, all Jewish students.
Right. So I need Mike Johnson. I need, what's his name, down in Florida, the governor of Florida,
DeSantis.
DeSantis. I need all of these people that are telling me that we have to rally and protect the sensibilities and sensitivities of all of these Jewish students. I need them to explain to me, why are these Jewish students leading these protests? I need them. I don't
Oh,
understand
because
that math.
because they're being told by the Jewish groups that are doxing these students. And by doxing, I mean um Rumisa Ozturk was they did a feature, a front page feature on their site, a group called Canary Mission. There's another
Hmm.
called Beitar, and they've been around a while, and they look for anti-Semites, quote, meaning anti-Israel, meaning meaning anti-Zionist, meaning
Anti-Zionist, right?
anti-Zionist. I mean, by Israel meaning uh, a, a Jewish state, a supremacist state, and and they know that many Jews in the United States, like I was raised as a Zionist. It was something that was very mainstream. In fact, liberals, the Democrats were a lot more because the Democrats had a lot more Jewish voters. Historically, that's its own thing. But that's another one that has this sharp a change from the gradualism that you were talking about in For Whom the Bell Tolls. From Whom the Bell Tolls.
The sun also
Sun
rises.
also rises, and so. Um, and that's changed radically. And Netanyahu talked about that in 2015. I mean, one thing about Netanyahu is he's smarter than, certainly smarter than Trump, as far as, and he's smarter. He's very, very sharp, and he understands the U.S. He was raised outside of Philadelphia, and so he said we're not going to be able to do this anymore. So we're going to need the Christian National. We're going to need
Hmm.
Christians United for Israel has 100,000 members, whereas AIPAC has 10,000. They are much bigger, and
Yes.
you see these people allying with right wing Jewish American leaders and the Israeli government, which is why Mike Huckabee is the
Oh,
ambassador to Israel, which
right.
is, I think he's the first non-Jewish ambassador to Israel. And it's why you see people like Reverend Hagee who believe that the Holocaust was God's will to be able to get Jews eventually to Israel, so that when Armageddon comes, it will be there for Christians. So they are allied with some of the most anti-Semitic, certainly the most racist, anti-indigenous people, anti-gay, you name it. What Mike Johnson is encapsulated in the largest supporter of Israel within the United States, the most consistent one.
And Mark, I don't have to tell you this, but the audience needs to understand it's a settler colonial state. That's all you need to say.
Right.
And folks, look that up. And if you want to call me anti-Semitic, call me anti-Semitic. Fine. I'm the truth. Malcolm said, if my telling you the truth makes you angry, don't get angry at me. Get angry at the truth.
I mean, I can say my family were the colonists there, and there's some crazy history behind that. My family's been there since 1918, um, or thereabouts. And so, and I was asked, I was in the encampment across from uh, Secretary Blinken's home, and they said, "How do how does your family rectify? How is that normal to them?" And I said, "Well, I said if you look at the letters from the frontier in 1880 from somebody in Utah on their
Mm.
ranch, and they wrote to their family, they didn't say, 'Well, I just got up today and I'm on genocided land, and I'm glad, I thank God every day that we were able to, murder indigenous people to take their land.' It's just part of life, and it is a result of genocide. But not everything is Nazi Germany. Not everything is that way. And the United States is also the most obvious settler
Correct.
colonial country, and that's why so many of the tactics used by the United States, even in wartime, are so similar to what Israel is using right now, where bomb a place and you burn it down and you push people off because everybody, and when it becomes, it's the mentality. And getting back to the immigration point, getting back to these folks that are being removed, it's the mentality that you don't know who your enemy is, because I think it's because you're that insecure with who you are as a people and as a country. And I think there's analogies between the US and Israel, is that, are you going to just take this over, or are you going to live as a country together? And to me, it's clear that in Israel, without, a large conversation about it, that there cannot be a Jewish state and there cannot be this separate Palestinian state, because it's going to then be a military might and they're going to be competitive, and we know which side is going to get the weapons. So people have to live in one place together and govern together, and it's going to be democratic, and it won't be an ethno state at all. And I think that that's also true in the United States. I think it's not a controversial point, because, we have not done that clearly in the United States by people we've either, committed genocide against, who are still around, or people who were brought here as slaves. And so I think that I think that that is something we're still struggling with. It's just we're not as concentrated a land.
When you just mentioned basically projecting one's own sense of inferiority onto others. And James Baldwin wrote the piece "I'm Not Your Negro," and the point of the piece is that the epithets and all of the um, well, all that the dominant culture is trying to place, all the negativity that the dominant culture is placing on the black uh, community is not a true reflection of the black community. It's actually an admission of inferiority by the dominant culture. And so what you when you just made that analysis, it made me think of Baldwin and his piece "I'm Not Your Negro."
Well, and for those who are in the post-reading world, which isn't just kids these days, it's all of us. There is a movie in the
Yes,
last 10 years which is fabulous, which
yes,
you can sit back and you don't have to read and watch. So, and
yes.
you can watch on the bus or whatever you're doing. So that's I'm Not Your Negro, the movie. But yeah, and that brings me back to how uh because there is an absurdity. It is not a specific thing. I mean, I'm working with a lot of the students at George Washington. I was very involved with their encampment, and I am asked by them, to go through their social medias, especially, the ones who are not um who are not US citizens, to go through their social media and take things off. And I think I'm right. I think I'm right a lot of times in advising them, but who knows? And I wanted to bring, the examples. I mean, a couple of them. I mean, Mahmoud Khalil was a leader. He actually played the same role that I played when we did an encampment at my university, which University of Florida, against South African apartheid, and I was one of the four that met with the administration, and so he's in that role too. So I know exactly what
Okay.
he's thinking and doing,
Hmm.
and so he's a public face, and that's one thing, and it's pretty incredible because we were seen as the people who synthesized the ideas and went to the university and met with them. And uh, the difference is that very few universities are not stonewalling. So I'm wondering, let's just go on him. What do you think the idea is be, behind going after, like, who is essentially like one of the leadership?
Well, if I understand your question, I think that not only are we looking at an attack on due process, but we're also looking at a direct attack on academia. And because when you look at the attacks on UPenn, Columbia, Harvard, Tufts, the our institutions of higher learning are under attack. And again, when you want to attack democracy, you attack the First Amendment, you attack due process, and you also attack academia because that's where people go. That's supposed to be the village square, the proverbial village square. That's where you're supposed to be able to go and walk and talk and engage with people from different areas with different ideas. You're supposed to learn. You're supposed to develop new approaches to problem solving. And when Donald Trump said, I think it was the last election, I love the uneducated. Somebody had made a comment of they had looked at I think they had done a study of the age and um I think the 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 level of education that many of the MAGA people had acquired, or maybe they just referred to him as stupid or something like that. And Trump said, "Oh, I love the uneducated." Well, dictators do, because dictators can't afford to have intelligent people questioning, challenging their diktat. So this is a direct attack on academia. Why? And, well, this is not academia, but to give you another example of just these senseless attacks, the governor of Maine says, well, Maine law prohibits us from discriminating against transgendered students. What does Donald Trump say? Well, then we're going to take away your fund. We're going to withhold your funding for student lunch programs. Okay, I'm going to, as the president of the United States, I'm going to starve children because a governor of a state says I have to follow state law instead of following your diktat.
Right.
So I know that's not academia, but that's just another example of the lengths to which this administration will go to stifle dissent.
Well, and weaken the people who are spreading ideas that are attractive. I mean, these encampments grew. They were attractive places. They were places where people spoke and learned. They were places where people felt you had rabbis, imams, priests there counseling people. You had academics. You had people from the public, and and then and there were universities like George Washington, which you wouldn't think of as a hotbed of anything but conformity, historically, right? And so,
Where's the Democratic Party? That see,
well, I'll tell you who did show up there in GW was the Tom the new head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, who parades around Capitol Hill in a mast, uh, Congressman Mast, who parades around in an IDF uniform, and Lauren Boebert and Donald from Florida, some of the most right-wing members of Congress showed up with a press conference and threatened the students. But no Democratic folks went down there.
and Mark, here's something that I think gets lost in. I tell my students all the time, you've got to get your emotion out of your analysis. As a political scientist, I've got to get my emotion out of my analysis, and I have to look at the facts. That's why I say on my show, it's rhetoric free radio. Um, which is why I have brilliant folks like you on, and thank you for the reconnection, because we gotta keep this conversation going.
Yes.
Um, uh, oh, but so a lot of folks are getting distracted and confused by Donald Trump. It's Trump, 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 Trump. Where is the Democratic Party? They are, instead of Hakeem Jeffries being the minority leader, he needs to be the opposition leader. They are they because in other parliamentary systems, the party not in power isn't called the minority; they're called the opposition. And where I know Bernie's out there, and I know AOC is out there, and I know Pramila Jayapal is out there, and now Chris Van Hollen has gone
Yeah.
down. But they're operating as lone soldiers. They're operating as individuals. Where is the party? And what are they offering to the American people as substantive opposition to what the Republicans are allowing to happen? Nancy Pelosi said a while ago, "Oh, as Democrats, we don't have to change anything." What's his name down there in Mississippi, the Raging Cajun, Bill Clinton's advisor, James
Carville.
Carville. We just need to sit back and allow them to implode. No, you don't, James Carville. You
Yes.
need to be out front screaming every day at the
That's
top of
Schumer's
your
fault too.
voice.
That's what Schumer said too. He'll make it. Well, and they got lucky in 2020. I happened to be in Iowa in 2020 during the caucus, and there was energy, and there was energy from Bernie, and there was some change energy from Elizabeth Warren, certainly on the consumer side, always has been, and there was energizing of people within the party, and
And what did they do to Bernie?
well, yeah,
Cut him
oh,
off at the
well,
knees.
yep, they cut him off, and they figured, okay, here's COVID. Trump has screwed up. Trump screwed it up so bad that he scared people like my mom, who changed her vote, uh, and to Biden because it became a, well, he's just too, he'll screw up so bad that people will come out, and that's not true because
Correct.
people don't have an idea. You have to give people a narrative, and
Correct.
there is no narrative. I mean, I don't, and they won't use certain people. I mean, it reminds me of before Rosa Parks, they didn't, at that point it's like we don't want somebody who's going to be uh detestable to the majority of people. We want to
Claudette
create the perfect.
Colvin was her name, is
Okay.
her name, because she's still
Yes.
alive.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Claudette Colvin, for those who don't know, was a unwed teen. I think she was pregnant at the time and unwed, and she sat on the bus in Montgomery before Mrs. Parks did. But because the optics of a young black girl, pregnant, unwed, was not considered the image that the NAACP wanted to put before the public, they waited for someone, quote unquote, more acceptable, such as Mrs. Parks, to do what she did. And hence, Mrs. Parks became the mother of the movement. Um, so just so people understand the history that you're
Right.
referencing.
Right. And
And Claudette Colvin is alive and well and living in New York.
wow. Okay. Well, well, and Rosa Parks lived long.
Yes, you did.
But I mean, the perfect victim. I mean, we see that with Abrego right now, Abrego Garcia.
Yes.
They're trying to say you were a gangbanger. I mean, it's interesting being somebody who knows all the players in this. I can say in his case, the misinformation. I know the judge who found that he had withholding of removal is one of the fairest people, one of the more conservative people that I know. He was put in by Trump to from the military to be the assistant chief immigration judge for Baltimore with no real experience in immigration, and not a lot of multiculturalism going on, but a very curious, very interested guy. And um, uh, for him to have made that decision, because believe me, there are judges that if they had made that decision, you'd be seeing their names out there because they're on the Project 2025, you know,
Mm-hmm.
blacklist. But he's not one of them, and people don't talk about that. And so the, you know, these cases right now, the student cases, uh, don't shock the soul. I mean, you have Rumisa Ozturk from Tufts, who is detained in Louisiana, has had 6 asthma attacks, and literally, what I was saying before is that with Mahmoud Khalil, you had a student leader, you had somebody who was out there. With Ramisa, she wasn't. Maybe she was at an camp, maybe she was at a rally, but what they got her for was she wrote
An
an
op-ed.
an op-ed. Now, the op-ed came after the student government of Tufts University, the student body, the student government Senate went all night debating 4 issues, and one of them they did not pass, which was to stop exchanges between Israeli universities and Tufts, and they that one was a deadlock, and they did not pass it, but they passed one overwhelmingly that said that the university should have open meetings with Palestinian groups to the university regents. Another which said that they should stop selling Sabra hummus on campus, and Sabra hummus is funded by PepsiCo and um, um, the a group called that's a Strauss um, Incorporated, which is the main food company in Israel, and they also fund the Golani Brigade, which is one of the most notorious human rights violating uh, uh, organizations or units of the Israeli military on the West Bank, and has been known to go through villages and do the things that we've seen where they, rout homes, burn them down, etc. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're very reasonable, and the so they passed 3 of these, and the university said we're not going to honor that. We're not going to do that. And so she representing graduate students among three the union among three other people wrote an op-ed saying, please respect the state the university senate. That's it. That's
Right.
it. That's it. And that got her detained. That's it. And so this threatens journalism on campuses. I know uh some universities don't even, like my university never does not have a newspaper. It's an independent Florida Alligator, which is separate because this happened in the 60s when they suppressed during Vietnam. And
Hmm.
so, as a professor, you see this example, you see a student. What are your thoughts?
I want my kids to be that active. I always refer to my students as my kids. I want my students to be that active. I want my students to be involved. That's why you're in college. That's why you go to college, to learn. And in fact, I tell my students usually the first or second day of class, my job here is to make you uncomfortable. My job here is to expose you to information and thought processes that you may not have been exposed to. And when I say make you uncomfortable, I don't mean that from a dramatic perspective. And I'm not here to make you uncomfortable for the sake of making you uncomfortable. But anytime you are forced to question the assumptions that you've been taught as a child, that's going to make you uncomfortable. And that's what I'm here to do. Otherwise, why are you here? Just stay home and wrap yourself in what your parents told you and walk around happy because ignorance is bliss. So that's what the process is supposed to be, is un is to make you uncomfortable. I can't tell you. In fact, I after dedicating my book, Politics Another Perspective, to my parents, I dedicated the book to Mr. Novell Dickinson, the chairman of the political science department when I was a freshman at Hampton, because Mr. Dickinson is the one beyond my parents and my community that forced me to develop a worldview. And that's why I went to Hampton, was to get a different perspective on reality. And the same thing when I got to Howard with Dr. Ronald Walters.
Mm.
And as Amiri Baraka labeled us, I'm one of Ron's boys. Um, because I was taught by the best. I was taught by Dr. Ronald Walters, and who
Mhm.
said in class one day, one of my colleagues, one of my classmates was delivering a paper, and Dr. Walters stopped him in the middle of the paper and he said, "You just said such and such and such and such. Where'd you get that from?" And my classmate said very proudly, "Dr. Walters, that's my opinion." And Dr. Walters said, "No, no, no, you don't understand." He said, "I don't care about your opinion. I want to know what you've read. I'm teaching scholars in here. Talk about your opinion in the hallway." That's why you go to school. So I, I commend these students. I applaud these students. They're doing what their parents or whoever it is that paid their tuition, that's what they're paying for. So again, it's an attack on academia, which is an attack on democracy.
I mean, when I support the students at GW, I do, I make that point. I said, look, you guys are spending 80, whatever, maybe more, $80,000 a year to be suspended or disciplined because you can't sleep at night knowing what's going on, knowing, what's going on with your colleagues. So I have them start, I would support them in disciplinary proceedings, which of course we can't speak, but we can prepare them. And I have them start by saying, why are you here? Because when I was doing the divestment thing, a lot of people show up. It's this fun thing on campus, but there was one of the four of us that were, in the leadership said to everybody there, okay, why are you here? What drove you to be here? And the level of these folks, and you know that with your own students uh, and yourself, is that the level that of struggle and thought and knowledge and way more knowledge than you teach in your classroom that these students are getting
Hmm.
um, is is in discussion and challenges is amazing. And that is the fact that that's threatening the university is really in its own self crazy.
You know, you said that you challenge the GW students to when they go before their disciplinary hearing to first ask the question, why am I here? That takes me to what I have been saying, that the Democrats need to be saying to the American public, what is government supposed to do? To me, that's where their conversation should begin. What do you expect government to do? And
Yes.
use that as the starting point to unpack what Donald Trump and his administration is doing, and then pointing out the inconsistencies. Government is not supposed to be deporting people in this manner.
No.
Government is not supposed to be stifling dissent. Government is democratic government is not supposed is to be rounding up people without due process, shipping them off to who knows where for who knows what for who knows how long. That's not what government that's not what we fought World War I and World War II to prevent this from taking over Europe. Why are we voting for it and allowing it to happen here?
Well, that's right. That's right. And I think it's also a matter, I don't know if you saw this when you were in Chicago, but a friend of mine who was there with or at the convention tabling and for a company, not for a cause, and she said, well, the Democrats think they've won on immigration. Their strategy on immigration was, we're going to get this bipartisan and we're going to put this bill out that's really harsh. So nobody who really wants enforcement is going to oppose it. And this is our last question: is nobody who's going to really want enforcement is going to oppose it. But when Trump tells them don't vote for it, which he'll
Right.
do because it's Biden, then we win. And there's a couple of things on that. Is one, I've got a friend who's recently laid off because she was reassigned after being assigned to the Senate Committee on Immigration for Senator Padilla in California. She was reassigned to the Civil Rights Division, which has been eliminated of U.S. Of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. They've been eliminated, so she's on admin leave. But she was working for Senator Padilla, who was one of the more progressive senators on immigration, but also the Democratic leader in immigration. They didn't include him. Schumer didn't include him on this gang of four choosing this. He replaced him with Kristen Sinema, who we
Mm-hmm.
know her politics, and so they came up with this. And I said to, and my thought when that happened was, thank God that Trump didn't sign that because it was horrific. And I said, well, what was good about it? Why do you like this bill? Because the Democrats saying this was a good bill. Why was it a good bill? I don't know. They're just telling me it was.
Right.
And that's the thing is people, this is one of the things that drives me kind of nuts about the Democrats because I've flirted in and out with them, and many people said, "How can you vote for them last time?" And I personally did the harm reduction.
Mm-hmm.
It was the hardest one, and I understand why people didn't. But when you hear things like that, you can't compete with Stephen Miller. You just can't compete with them with that mentality of, well, we gave you something so hard and you didn't take it. It's like, yeah, because you want to go hard, we'll go harder
Right.
and we'll win. And you
Right.
want, you can't call these people equivalent to Nazis and say it's a problem and then not just wipe them off. And so,
Right.
but my question to you is, having been there, Do we take strands and try to take over what the Democratic Party is? Is it not worth the effort and we build an alternative movement? What do you tell? I mean, I know you can't tell your students, but what are you thinking when you're seeing your students out there?
Well, I'm telling them they have to vote their interests, and but the first thing is they have to understand what their interests are. And I wrote a piece a while ago called "The Dangers of Binary Thinking for the African American Community," because we have been bludgeoned with the duopoly. But oh my God, what do you mean you're challenging Kamala Harris? What are you supporting Donald Trump? No, I oppose genocide. And so, Kamala, you can't sell me genocide. Well, Donald Trump is horrific. Yeah, so is genocide. Um, you can't sell me the Ukraine war. I'm not buying it. I know how that thing started. I know it wasn't just Vladimir Putin waking up on the 21st of February and saying, you know what I'm going to do today? I think I'm going to go ahead and. No, it didn't start like that. Um, so you have to vote your interests. And I'm very disappointed that the third party candidates, and whether it was Jill Stein, whether it was Dr. West, that the third party candidates did not get more traction in this last election than I thought they were going to get. But that's the direction I think that people really now have to look. And final point, because I think the Democrats are making a huge mistake. They're looking at the disaffection within the Republican Party, thinking or assuming that those people are automatically going to come to their camp. Hakeem Jeffries said a couple weeks ago when the protests at the town halls broke out, and Donald Trump first said, "Oh, these are paid protesters," and then Mike Johnson, of course, being the puppet that he is, just repeated, parroted Trump's ridiculous statements, and then Hakeem Jeffries says, "Oh, well, we don't have to pay them because the people are with us." Hakeem, have you looked at the Pew polling lately? that that the Democratic Party's approval rating is the worst it's been in 50 years. Hakeem, when you turn around, do you notice there's no one standing behind you? The people aren't with you. It's not going to be an automatic shift of allegiance from disgruntled Republicans to happy Democrats. You have to offer the people something. You have to explain to them how you're going to make their lives better. You have to tell them genocide is wrong. And if you don't do that, they will not come to you. What was the adage? There go my people now, I must lead them. Listen to what the public is saying. If you Hakeem, he says, well, what are we? We don't have the House, we don't have the Senate, we don't have the executive branch. What are we supposed to do? You're an elected representative, damn it. Represent. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to represent. And unfortunately, you are held in the balance and found wanting.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Wilmer. This is just the start off of what is going to be a long conversation and a long movement building and a big paradigm change. And who knows where we'll go with our quote elected. I'm smiling when I think opposition, because I don't know that might require them to have a point of view, and not just wait for the dam to break, but
Right.
because I tell you, it's not going to break. They always surprise you. They thought the indictments would do it. Oh, they thought that 32 counts, and they think because they wouldn't vote for somebody with 32 convictions, nobody else would, and they don't know their country. They don't. They got to get out a little more, and get a little bold, but these things are going to keep going on, and we'll certainly continue this conversation. So thank you so much.
Oh
This
man.
is
And thank you, Mark, again for reconnecting with me, man. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm looking now, I'm putting you on public notice to come on connecting the dots. We're gonna get that done this week.
perfect. Okay. And our show is the music that you heard coming in is from Insect Factory, which is Jeff Barsky, and he's got a couple of other great bands, Shadow Riot and Bedmaker. Look them up. He's local here in DC, and he's also a fourth grade school teacher at Rolling Terrace Elementary. And
Oh, Rolling Terrace.
yes, he's at
Okay.
Rolling Terrace, and he's in Silver Spring or Langley Park, and
Tacoma. Is that
Maryland. So,
okay? Langley Park or Tacoma? Okay.
yep, Langley,
Okay.
Tacoma. All right. So, thank you, Wilmer, and we'll talk soon.
Pleasure, Mark.
All right. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.